Somewhere deep inside the Ural Mountains, behind layers of rock, steel, and silence, there is a city. Not a ruin, not an abandoned Cold War relic, a functioning city with electricity, with people, with roads carved through solid stone. And the Russian government has never fully explained what it is. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is something the United States Congress asked about directly. This is something the New York Times wrote about in 1996. This is a real place, a real construction project that consumed billions of dollars, and a real mystery that has never been officially solved. The mountain is called Yamantau. In the Bashkir language, that name translates to something deeply unsettling. It means Evil Mountain, and when you learn what might be inside it, that name starts to feel less like folklore and more like a warning. Let's go back to the early 1990s. The Cold War has just ended. The Soviet Union has collapsed. The world is exhaling. Countries are cutting defense budgets. Nuclear arsenals are being reduced through treaties. The general mood in geopolitics is the worst is over. But American spy satellites are noticing something strange happening at a mountain in central Russia. Construction. Massive industrial-scale construction. Thousands of workers. Fleets of heavy machinery. Tunnels being drilled into the heart of a mountain. And this construction isn't slowing down now that the Cold War is over. It's accelerating. Think about that for a second. The threat that justified building massive underground shelters has apparently disappeared, but Russia isn't stopping. They're building faster. That's the kind of detail that keeps intelligence analysts awake at night. American officials began asking questions. When U.S. diplomats raised the topic with their Russian counterparts, the answers kept changing. At one point, Russian officials said it was a mining site. Then they said it was a food storage facility. Then they called it a government retreat. 3 completely different explanations for the same project. When your neighbor keeps changing their story about what they're building in their backyard, you start paying very close attention. By the mid-1990s, members of the United States Congress were openly demanding answers. They wanted to know how Russia could claim to be reducing its nuclear capabilities on one hand, while pouring enormous resources into a mysterious underground facility on the other. The concern wasn't just curiosity, it was strategic. If Russia was building a shelter of this scale, what exactly were they preparing to survive? Now, to understand why this project makes sense from a Russian strategic perspective, you need to understand a few things about what's hidden underground in Russia. Russia didn't just build one secret underground facility, they built a civilization beneath the earth. During the Cold War, the Soviet military understood something brutal and practical. If a nuclear war ever started, the surface of the earth becomes uninhabitable very quickly. Nuclear weapons don't just destroy buildings. The blasts create overpressure waves that can collapse structures miles away. The heat is capable of igniting fires across entire cities. Then comes the radiation. And if enough nuclear weapons are detonated, the resulting dust and debris block sunlight, dropping temperatures across the planet. Scientists call this nuclear winter. So the Soviet strategy wasn't just how do we fight a nuclear war? It was how do we survive one? And their answer was to go underground. Moscow alone is believed to have a deep underground metro system completely separate from the public subway. Not a myth, not a rumor. Western intelligence agencies have referred to this as Metro 2, a parallel transit network running far beneath the city, connecting the Kremlin to key government facilities, military headquarters, and bunkers, deep enough to survive a direct nuclear strike on the surface above. Think of it like an iceberg. What Muscovites ride to work every day is the tip. The real infrastructure is below. Then there's the perimeter system, which Russia officially acknowledged. Known in the West as Dead Hand, this is one of the most haunting pieces of military engineering ever created. It's a semi-autonomous nuclear response system designed to guarantee retaliation, even if the entire Soviet leadership has been killed in a first strike. Sensors detect nuclear detonations. If no communication is received from command, the system assumes leadership is dead, and it launches automatically. It was built on a single ruthless logic. If you know we can retaliate even after you've killed everyone in charge, you'll never try to kill everyone in charge. Yamantau fits into this same philosophy. It's not paranoia, it's doctrine. Soviet, and later Russian, military strategy was built on the idea that leadership survival equals deterrence. If the enemy believes they can decapitate your command structure in a first strike, they might be tempted to try. If you make your leadership impossible to kill, you eliminate that temptation. So what exactly is it, Yamantau? The mountain itself is the highest peak in the southern Urals, rising to roughly 1,640 meters above sea level. But the more important number isn't how high it goes, it's how deep it goes. The rock of the Ural Mountains is ancient granite, dense, hard, geologically stable. It doesn't shift, it doesn't crack easily. It's one of the best natural materials in the world for absorbing shock waves from explosions. Military engineers understand that a certain depth of solid granite can protect against even a nuclear detonation on the surface above. The mountain itself becomes the bunker wall. At the base of the mountain is a closed city. Its name is Mezhgori. And when I say closed, I mean genuinely inaccessible to outsiders. This is not a city you can visit. You cannot drive through it. You cannot fly a drone over it. Entry requires special government authorization, and that authorization is almost never granted to foreigners. Residents who work on the facility reportedly sign strict secrecy agreements. The population of Mezhgori numbers in the thousands. These are not soldiers living in barracks. These are families, civilians, workers with children who go to school in a town that officially, in terms of public knowledge, barely exists. The city has schools, shops, infrastructure. It functions like any normal Russian town, except that it is wrapped in a layer of official silence, so thick that even basic questions about it bounce back unanswered. The workers who built the tunnels, and the tunnels go deep, carved by industrial drilling equipment operating for years, removed enormous quantities of rock from the mountain. Satellite imagery picked this up. The excavated material was substantial enough to suggest a facility of considerable size being hollowed out from the inside. Now here's where the different theories converge into something coherent. Russia, at the highest levels of government, operates what's called a continuity of government plan. Every major nuclear power has one. The idea is simple. If the country is attacked, the government must be able to keep functioning. Decision makers must survive. Command structures must stay intact. A country without functioning leadership after a nuclear strike is a country that has effectively lost, even if its missiles are still in the ground. For that plan to work, you need a place. A real physical place where leaders can go, survive, and continue to make decisions. That place needs to be hardened against nuclear blasts. It needs its own power supply, independent of the national grid, which would be destroyed in an attack. It needs its own water supply, its own food storage, its own communications equipment capable of reaching submarines, missile silos, and military commanders across the country. Essentially, you need a self-contained civilization. Underground. Built to survive the unsurvivable. This is almost certainly what Yamantau is. The scale of the construction, the secrecy, the location chosen specifically for its geological stability, the nearby civilian support city, the continued investment even after the Cold War, all of it points to a facility designed not just for a few weeks of emergency shelter, but for months or potentially years of underground operation. Imagine the engineering challenge. You're not just digging a big hole, you're building an underground world that needs to function completely independently from the surface. Air must be filtered against nuclear, biological, and chemical contamination. Fresh water must be stored or sourced from underground aquifers. Food stocks must be maintained on a rotating basis, constantly refreshed so nothing expires. Electrical power must be generated on site, likely through diesel generators or possibly nuclear power with enormous fuel reserves. Communications must be routed through hardened systems capable of surviving electromagnetic pulses, which nuclear detonations generate in massive quantities and which destroy ordinary electronics instantly. An EMP from a nuclear weapon doesn't just knock out your phone. It fries every circuit, every microchip, every piece of unshielded electronic equipment across a vast area. All modern infrastructure, power grids, water systems, hospitals, transportation networks, all of it goes dark simultaneously. Whatever is inside Yamantau must be shielded against that. The electronics, the communications, everything must be wrapped in what engineers call a Faraday cage, a protective enclosure that blocks electromagnetic fields. None of this is cheap. None of this is simple. Building a facility capable of housing government leadership, maintaining communications with nuclear forces, and sustaining operations for an extended period requires the kind of investment that nation-states make. Not corporations, not private individuals, governments. And Russia made that investment visibly for years, while the rest of the world was trying to move on from the Cold War. There's a detail here that doesn't get discussed enough. The construction at Yamantau continued well into the 2000s. This isn't a Cold War relic that was started in 1970 and abandoned in 1991. This is an ongoing project. Russia didn't build this because they feared a Soviet-era nuclear exchange. They built it and kept building it because the logic of deterrence and leadership survival doesn't expire when political systems change. The weapons still exist, the targeting still exists, the possibility of catastrophic miscalculation still exists. A country that possesses thousands of nuclear warheads never really stops thinking about what happens if someone uses them. And here is where the story shifts from history to the present. In 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Western governments began taking a renewed interest in Russian nuclear facilities and doctrine. The question of whether Russian leadership could survive a retaliatory nuclear strike became not just academic, but urgently relevant. Analysts pulled out the old satellite imagery. They reviewed what was known about Yamantau. They looked at the network of hardened bunkers and underground facilities Russia had built over decades. What they found was that Russia had been doing something the West, in its post-Cold War optimism, had largely stopped doing: preparing. While NATO countries were closing bunkers, selling off shelters, and reassuring citizens that the nuclear threat was over, Russia was quietly continuing to invest in survival infrastructure. Not loudly, not in press releases, just building, drilling, hardening, stockpiling. Medjugorje still stands today. Yamantau is still a closed zone. Russian officials still do not give straight answers about what's inside. The construction that began decades ago produced something substantial enough to require a permanent supporting city, something important enough to maintain strict secrecy for 30 plus years across entirely different Russian governments and political systems. Whatever it is, Russia considered it worth building, worth maintaining, worth protecting with layers of official silence so deep that even today, we cannot tell you with certainty what exactly is at the heart of that mountain. What we can tell you is this: mountains don't come with cities at their base by accident. Granite doesn't excavate itself. Thousands of workers don't sign secrecy agreements to guard a food warehouse. And governments don't spend the equivalent of billions on something they don't consider absolutely essential. The Evil Mountain holds a secret, and Russia has decided the world doesn't need to know what it is. But here's the detail that will stay with you. Yamantau is not unique. Russia's Federal Protective Service, the agency responsible for guarding top government officials, is known to operate a network of underground facilities across the country, not just one. The thinking goes that in a real nuclear crisis, you don't want all your leadership in a single location, because a single location can be targeted. You spread them out, multiple bunkers, multiple command nodes, multiple threads of authority that can survive independently and reweave the government back together after the worst has passed. Well, Yamantau might be the most famous, but if the doctrine is correct, it's one node in a web. And somewhere, right now, in mountains and beneath plains across Russia, in concrete rooms sealed against radiation and EMP and blast pressure, the lights are on. Someone is maintaining it. Someone is keeping it ready for a day they hope never comes, but refuse to be unprepared for.